public treasury. And again, the founders may not have anticipated every particular angle of the president's grift, but they did put a provision in the Constitution. And it's called the Domestic Emoluments Clause, or also known as the Presidential Compensation Clause. It provides that the president is paid with a fixed salary that's set by Congress for his entire term of office and not a penny more. But what President Trump is doing is using the Treasury as a kiddie for travel to his own resorts and hotels and rent in his buildings so that he can enlarge his salary from the Treasury without complying with this provision of the Constitution. Now, to be sure, not every violation of the law or even of the Constitution is necessarily grounds for impeachment. The standard in the Constitution is that president can be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. It's ultimately up to the Congress to determine what count as high crimes or misdemeanors, but as we have cited in the legal analysis at the impeachdonaldtrumpnow.org website, the founders of the Constitution were actually quite clear on this specific point. One of the leading founders, Edmund Jennings Randolph, who was confronted at the Virginia Ratifying Convention with an argument against adoption of the Constitution on the grounds that the president might be too powerful and too subject to outside influence, cited these provisions, the Foreign Emoluments Clause and the Domestic Emoluments Clause, and said, if discovered, he may be impeached. That's where we are now. I want to close with a note that the examples of impeachable violations that we've cited in the legal analysis at impeachdonaldtrumpnow.org and that I've talked about today may not be the end of it. In the coming weeks, we will be working with our distinguished legal advisory board, which includes Professor Ross, and which you can see on the impeachdonaldtrumpnow.org website, to update that analysis, considering what President Trump has done so far in office. And of course, once an impeachment investigation is launched, Congress may decide to expand the scope. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Our next speaker will be Norman Solomon, the co-founder and coordinator of Roots Action.
In addition to the 5 voices that you will hear up at this microphone today, there are other voices far more important that will be heard in the future. The 870,000 people who, as of this morning, have signed the petition at impeachdonaldtrumpnow.org live in every community of the United States. That number continues to grow. We know that in a matter of days it will cross the 1 million threshold and keep going. Those names are much more than letters on a printed page or pixels on a screen. They're people who care deeply about the Constitution, who understand that it's a fundamental precept of democracy that no one is above the law, that the most powerful position of the U.S. government must not be occupied by someone who has shown willingness, even eagerness to violate fundamental precepts of the Constitution. And what we're going to be seeing that may not yet be apparent from Capitol Hill is that around the United States, not only the signers of this petition so far, but many, many millions of other people believe deeply that when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And this petition campaign is based on that concept. So the petition is only one part of what is going to begin to unfold in the next several weeks. And that is that in every congressional district in this country, people have already begun and will continue in greater numbers to contact their representative in the House and to say in no uncertain terms that no one is above the law and that in this situation, whatever the partisan affiliation of the member of the House, it's imperative to launch a formal impeachment investigation. Now, we sometimes hear the skepticism, maybe even cynicism, that nothing's going to happen in the House on impeachment because most of the members are Republicans. And I think we need to remind ourselves that history tells us something very different. When in 1974 the House Judiciary Committee voted on impeachment, on 3 articles of impeachment of the Republican President Richard Nixon, out of the 38 members of that committee, 7 Republicans voted for impeachment. And there are many strong reasons, not only in history, but in our current political situation, to believe that large numbers of members of the House, whatever their party, are going to be feeling the heat. And that heat has begun. And next week, the temperature will rise as members go back to their districts, some of them holding town hall meetings, some of them being visited by their constituents to press this point. And so in closing, I want to emphasize that the ImpeachDonaldTrumpNow.org campaign is not by any means only about a petition drive. This is about an awakening democratic fervor at the grassroots that will bring about the impeachment of this president.
Thank you, Norman. Our next speaker is Professor Catherine Ross of George Washington University Law School. She is a member of our legal advisory board for this campaign at ImpeachDonaldTrumpNow.org.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you who came here today to cover this event. I'm a law professor. I'm also a historian and a constitutional scholar. And I joined the Legal Advisory Board for this effort because, like many other people, I believe we've entered uncharted territory, and I'm concerned about the fundamental future of our democratic institutions. Impeachment has been and should remain rare, and it shouldn't be undertaken lightly. But we also should not shy from using it when impeachment is called for. So I see my role here today as providing some legal perspective on the constitutional limits on presidential compensation. Alexander Hamilton, who advocated for a powerful executive, explained in Federalist Number 73 that the domestic emoluments or presidential compensation clause would forestall even inadvertent corruption. And it's an integral part of the separation of powers that are the structure of our government. The rule, Hamilton wrote, will ensure the legislature can neither weaken the president's fortitude by cutting his salary, nor corrupt his integrity by appealing to his avarice. Neither the federal government nor the individual states, Hamilton continued, will be at liberty to give, nor will he be at liberty to receive any other emolument than the salary established before he took office. He can, of course, have no pecuniary inducement to renounce or desert the independence intended for him by the Constitution. The framers' goal was clear: to root out all potential for corruption in order to ensure that no temptations could interfere with the president's judgment respecting the nation's best interests and his ability to faithfully execute his oath. As Hamilton indicated, the corruption need not be conscious or intended. Even if the president's financial interests affect his judgment only inadvertently, the harms to the body politic are the same as if he intended to advance his own interests. The Constitution's mandatory limit on presidential compensation was designed to eliminate all personal economic temptations that might affect the president's policy decisions, including biases and inclinations of which the president himself might remain unaware. When the framers made it unconstitutional for the president to accept any form of benefit from other branches or levels of government, they eliminated the risk of even an appearance that any part of federal, state, or local government might influence the president through emoluments. Today, we rarely use that term, emoluments, And when we do, its meaning is limited to compensation or payment from employment, perhaps including perks like a company car. But the concept of emoluments extended much further when the Constitution was written. I followed the lead of the originalist approach to constitutional interpretation that is favored, well, was favored by Justice Scalia, is favored by President Trump, and many in Congress, to find out what emoluments meant to the founders. And I did that by consulting the leading dictionaries at the time the framers wrote the Constitution. And by the way, the dictionaries I used are the ones most frequently cited by the federal courts when they look to original meaning. Emoluments begin with what today we call a salary, or what they called profit from an office or employ. But they embrace much more. They include advantage and gains in general. Barclay's 1791 dictionary defines advantage, in turn, as a favorable opportunity. In mercantile affairs, a premium or profit greater than what can be obtained by law. Samuel Johnson's renowned dictionary, too, expressly defined advantage as favorable circumstances, overplus, something more than lawful gain, as well as to grow rich. In contemporary terms, overplus would include favorable negotiations and favorable tax or zoning rulings and sweetheart deals. Gains are much the same. Several dictionaries described gains as a synonym for profits or advantage, and more specifically, overplus in a comparative situation, in other words, a sweetheart deal. Webster's American Dictionary, published in 1830, adds to grow rich, and looking to the French roots of the word, something obtained as an advantage. So the Constitution clearly says that the president cannot receive any form of financial advantage from state or federal governments during his term. But while the clause doesn't specify the remedy that applies when a president violates this specific and very concrete provision of the Constitution, the rule is not waivable. It's embedded in the text of the Constitution. And unlike the Foreign Emoluments Clause, which specifically says that Congress has discretion to waive the rule with respect to particular gifts, there is no such congressional power here. This is an unwaivable rule. And therefore, the only possible remedy, the one that the Constitution contemplates, is impeachment, a remedy which is intended for injuries to society as a whole. Hamilton referred to these injuries as violations of some public trust. The Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service reviewed the history and purpose of impeachment in 2015. It concluded that impeachment is appropriate for, quote, misconduct that damages the state, including constitutional wrongs that subvert the structure of government or undermine the integrity of the office and even of the Constitution itself. And the report reviewing all the impeachments of every form of government official at the federal level concluded that 3 categories of harm have historically led to impeachment in the United States. First, improperly exceeding or abusing the powers of office. Second, behavior incompatible with the function and purpose of the office. And third, misusing the office for personal gain. It seems that all 3 are implicated by the president's continued ownership in and benefit from his businesses in the United States and abroad.
Thank you, Professor Ross. Our last speaker before we open up for questions is Ben Clements. Ben is the chairman of the board of directors of Free Speech for People, founding partner of the Boston law firm of Clements and Pino, and a former federal prosecutor in Boston, as well as a former chief counsel to Governor Deval Patrick of Massachusetts, former Governor Deval Patrick.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all of you for coming out for this important announcement today. This campaign is about defending our constitutional democracy, and it's also a test. It's a test